It's no secret that Americans have become more and more overweight through the last several decades. Our heart attacks, diabetes, obesity, and other health ailments are facts, but the causes are still only speculations. One piece of this puzzle that is only now receiving attention is sugar. American obesity rates have risen in parallel with the consumption of added sweeteners. Our sugar intake has doubled since 1910 and is more than 10 times greater than it was 200 years ago. To what extent has sugar played a role in the obesity epidemic? This is our journey to discover the not-so-sweet truth about sugar. The sugar story begins thousands of years ago when Polynesians discovered sugarcane in 3000 BCE. However, it was forgotten for a few thousand years until being rediscovered around 700 BCE through globalizing trade systems and imperial conquest and expansion. Sugarcane became famous for its delicious sweetness, and through the next 1,000 years went from being a luxury crop to a commonplace food item. With the introduction of beet sugar in the 1800s, there were additional price drops and sugar became even more prominent. However, at this point, Americans were only consuming less than 10 pounds of sugar per person per year. That would all change with the rise of the processed food era. After World War II, people craved convenience, and thus the TV dinner was born. From there, processed food exploded, and the once simple 800-item grocery stores of the past became convenience food monstrosities, carrying over 600,000 different food products, 80% of which contained added sugars. Now that people had access to foods like chocolate syrup, toaster waffles, and fruit gummies, sugar consumption went through the roof. By the 1960s, the average American consumed about 80 pounds of added sweeteners each year. In the 1970s, high fructose corn syrup entered the sugar playing field and made sweetened beverages and foods easier and cheaper to produce than ever before. By this time, roughly 14% of the population was obese. In 1977, people thought their concerns were answered when the McGovern Report was released, condemning fat in foods and encouraging people to limit their fat intake to prevent themselves from gaining weight. These results spurred the low-fat craze of the 1980s, and processed foods played an integral part in this movement. Scientists removed the fat from food products, rendering them absolutely flavorless. Because fat-free and flavorless was not going to sell products, sugar was added to make up the difference. People devoured these new processed foods like never before, and as a result, obesity rose to its current level of about 33%. Why is it that sugar is making us fat and sick? It has to do with how our body metabolizes it. To understand how sugar is correlated with metabolic syndrome, it requires some background on its chemical composition. Sucrose, or table sugar, is made up of two monosaccharides, glucose and fructose. While glucose is used by all cells in the body for energy through cellular respiration, fructose is metabolized almost entirely by the liver through a process quite similar to the breakdown of alcohol. Consequently, fructose is more similar to alcohol in many ways than it is to glucose. Like sucrose, high fructose corn syrup is also composed of glucose and fructose in about a 50-50 ratio. Although sugar and high fructose corn syrup are not all that different chemically, studies analyzing the health effects of this sweetener have produced mixed results. Despite the conflicting research, the main reason high fructose corn syrup is so dangerous is that it is extremely cheap and therefore extremely abundant in our food supply. So what is so terrible about fructose, the toxic monosaccharide in sugar, corn syrup, and other added sweeteners? To begin, 30% of fructose consumed turns into fat, leading to weight gain and an increased risk of heart disease. Furthermore, fructose decreases the particle size of LDL cholesterol and increases serum uric acid levels, both of which are associated with metabolic syndrome. Finally, fructose does not stimulate insulin secretion like glucose. Not only does insulin promote the absorption of glucose from the blood, but it is also tied to leptin, the hormone that tells the brain when you are full. Studies show that those with high fructose diets have low levels of leptin and high levels of ghrelin, the hunger hormone, and as a result, have a higher tendency to overeat. Fructose can also lead to overeating through its influence on neurotransmitters. Essentially, sugar causes the release of dopamine, the pleasure neurotransmitter, in the reward center of the brain. However, when we chronically stimulate the system, we lose dopamine receptors, meaning it will take more sugar to satisfy us. In other words, we develop tolerance, a key component of any type of addiction or substance abuse. When we don't get our full fix of dopamine, we can feel the effects of withdrawal, such as fatigue, anxiety, or even depression. These symptoms of tolerance and withdrawal from sugar have been supported by extensive research, including a recent study in which the reward center within the brains of rats expressed more activity when given Oreos than when given cocaine. With fructose being added to our food in doses higher than ever before, it has become increasingly important to be aware of the deleterious health effects of fructose and to look for avenues for change. Policies like soda taxes and improved ingredient labeling are slowly being implemented to combat the problem from a political standpoint. People can also take personal action by reading nutrition labels and reducing the amount of sugar in their diet. As we have explored, the processed food industry has flooded our food supply with more and more sweeteners. This excess sugar consumption is just one of the many routes that has driven our rates of obesity and chronic diseases through the roof. It is important to be aware of all the different factors that have gotten us here, but it is even more critical to remember the main issue, our health. However, personal health awareness is not enough to tackle these problems. We must also be cognizant of the larger structural issues at hand. By considering all the pieces of the puzzle, we will be better equipped to create healthy changes not only for ourselves, but for society as a whole.